Just after midnight on December 1st, 2018, a woman named Celeste Harrow sat in the front passenger seat of a family car on a cold Baltimore street, looking out the window at someone she believed needed help. She was 54 years old, a wife, a mother, a respected professional, and according to everyone who loved her, the kind of woman who could never ignore someone in distress. Within minutes, she would be critically wounded. Before sunrise, she would be dead. And by morning, the city would be told a heartbreaking story. A kind woman, a stranger asking for help, a random attack in the dark. It sounded tragic. It sounded believable. It sounded like the kind of senseless violence that leaves an entire city shaken. But investigators would soon discover something far more chilling. Because the real threat wasn't outside the vehicle. It had been sitting right beside her all along. Celeste Harrow had built a life people admired. Friends described her as intelligent, grounded, and deeply compassionate. She worked as an engineer and was known for being methodical, dependable, and generous in quiet ways that didn't call attention to themselves. She was the person who remembered birthdays, the person who checked in after hard days, the person who carried herself with calm even when life became complicated. Family members would later say that Celeste had a strong sense of responsibility and a soft spot for people who were struggling. That detail mattered. Because after her death, that exact part of her personality would be used to sell a lie. Celeste was married to Gavin Harrow, a man who, at least in public, seemed devoted to her. He could be emotional. He could appear affectionate. He knew how to perform concern in a way that made people trust him. To outsiders, they looked like a normal couple with a blended family and the ordinary tensions that come with years of marriage. Gavin's adult daughter, Betrayal Harrow, was still very much part of his life, and while the family dynamic was not always simple, nothing about it publicly suggested that something violent was brewing beneath the surface. But investigators would later come to believe that behind closed doors, the truth was darker than anyone imagined. On the evening of November 30th, 2018, Celeste, Gavin, and Betrayal spent time together in what looked like a completely normal family outing. There was no obvious sign of danger. No public argument. No dramatic scene. Nothing that would make anyone watching think this night would end in headlines. Sometime after midnight, according to Gavin's original account, the three were driving through East Baltimore when they came upon a woman standing near the road holding a sign asking for money to feed her baby. Gavin later told police that Celeste saw the woman, felt immediate sympathy, and rolled down the window to offer cash. Then, he claimed, a man suddenly rushed the car, reached inside, and attacked her before fleeing into the darkness. It was the kind of story that instantly grips the public. A woman murdered for trying to help someone in need. A random act of violence. A city on edge. At around 12:30 a.m., Celeste was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors fought to save her, but despite their efforts, she did not survive. By morning, news of the killing had spread quickly. Local media framed it as a horrifying act of senseless street violence. Viewers were devastated. A compassionate woman had died trying to do the right thing. And then came the emotional public statements. Gavin appeared before cameras, visibly shaken, voice cracking as he described the woman he had lost. He called Celeste his best friend, his partner, his whole world. For a brief moment, the city mourned with him. But detectives were already seeing cracks. The first warning signs were subtle, small inconsistencies, slight changes in wording, tiny details that shifted each time the story was retold. Gavin's timeline didn't feel stable. Betrayal's account wasn't perfectly aligned either. Detectives from the Baltimore Police Department, including Detective Nolan Voss and Detective Mara Keene, began reconstructing the route the family claimed to have taken. They reviewed surveillance footage from nearby intersections. They mapped the timeline minute by minute, and almost immediately, something felt wrong. The vehicle was not appearing where it should have. Surveillance cameras along the expected route either failed to show the family car at all or showed movement that didn't fit the version Gavin had described. Investigators widened the search. They pulled traffic footage. They reviewed timestamps. They compared those with phone records and location data. And then, the case took a dramatic turn. The digital trail suggested the family had not remained on the route Gavin described. Instead, evidence pointed to the car being in Druid Hill Park during the critical window when Celeste was fatally attacked. That changed everything. Because Druid Hill Park was not the location described in the emotional public narrative, it was darker, more isolated, more private, a place where a confrontation could happen without witnesses, a place where a false story could be built afterward. As detectives dug deeper, the theory of a random roadside attacker began to collapse. Physical evidence did not fully support Gavin's account. The timeline was off. The route was wrong. The panic in the aftermath no longer looked spontaneous. It looked rehearsed. And then, investigators began focusing on the one other person in the car that night, Betrayal. At first, she stood by her father. But pressure changes people. Evidence changes people. And eventually, according to prosecutors, Betrayal began to cooperate. What she told investigators would become the turning point in the entire case. According to the prosecution's theory, there had been no stranger, no woman holding a sign, no sudden attacker appearing from the shadows. The entire story had been fabricated. Instead, they alleged that Celeste had been attacked by her own husband, Gavin Harrow, during that stop in Druid Hill Park. The woman the city had been told to fear didn't exist. The man everyone had sympathized with was the real killer. And the public tears that followed? Prosecutors would argue they were part of a calculated performance designed to mislead police, manipulate the media, and hide the truth. What happened that night, as later presented in court, was terrifying in the most intimate way possible. Celeste was in the passenger seat. She was with family. She believed she was safe. She had no reason to think the man beside her posed any danger. At some point during that stop in the park, prosecutors argued Gavin turned on her. Fast, deliberate, controlled. The attack happened in or near the vehicle, during a short window when no strangers were present. Then came the cover story, the drive to the hospital, the frantic explanation, the media appearances. The first was the ad excestum Maddox and comments on ylife.com. The emotional statements, the carefully constructed image of a grieving husband shattered by random violence. And if that betrayal wasn't enough, investigators would uncover what they believed was the motive: money. Prosecutors alleged Gavin killed Celeste for life insurance proceeds, not because of a sudden fight, not because of uncontrollable rage, but because he believed her death could financially benefit him. During the investigation, authorities examined financial records, insurance details, and patterns of behavior that suggested planning rather than panic. This wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was a case built on greed, deception, and the cold exploitation of trust. Then came another stunning development. As investigators closed in, evidence suggested Gavin was not preparing to defend himself. He was preparing to run. Authorities later tracked Gavin and Betrayal to Texas, near the Mexico border, after prosecutors said he was attempting to flee the country before the case fully closed around him. That moment became one of the most damning parts of the prosecution's narrative. Innocent people don't usually run. Guilty people often do. When the case finally went to trial in December 2021, the courtroom became the place where the fake story unraveled, piece by piece. Prosecutors laid out the timeline with precision. They walked jurors through surveillance footage, digital evidence, route inconsistencies, and the statements that kept changing. They argued that Gavin had counted on public sympathy and the fear of random street crime to shield himself from suspicion. They said he weaponized Celeste's kindness because he knew people would believe she would stop to help someone. Then Betrayal testified. The defense attacked her credibility, arguing she had her own reasons to cooperate. But prosecutors insisted her account was supported by hard evidence, by the timeline, by the route, by the phone data, by the contradictions that had piled up until the original story could no longer stand. It was no longer a mystery about a stranger. It was a case about betrayal inside a family. On December 9, 2021, after deliberating, the jury found Gavin Harrow guilty of first-degree murder and a related weapons offense. The courtroom was heavy with emotion. For Celeste's family, the verdict did not feel like victory. It felt like confirmation of the unthinkable. The man who had stood before cameras and asked the public to grieve with him had stolen the life of the woman he claimed to love. At sentencing on February 28, 2022, Gavin was sentenced to life in prison, plus additional time on the weapons charge. Celeste's sister, Taryn Whitlock, later spoke publicly about the devastation left behind. She described Celeste not as a headline, not as a case, but as a woman full of warmth, intelligence, and grace, a woman whose final moments should never define her. In the years after her death, loved ones continued speaking about the danger of manipulation, coercion, and the painful truth that sometimes the most convincing lies come from the people standing closest to the victim. And that is what makes Celeste Harrow's story so haunting. Not just the violence, not just the deception, but the way her compassion became part of the cover story. The killer understood exactly who she was. He knew the city would believe she would try to help someone, because she would have. That lie worked precisely because it was built around a truth. Celeste really was kind. If this case shocked you, tell me in the comments what disturbed you most: the fake roadside story, the betrayal, or the fact that an entire city believed the wrong version at first. And if you want more deeply researched true crime documentaries told with empathy, suspense, and respect for the victims, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because in cases like this, every detail matters, every timeline matters, and the truth deserves to be remembered long after the performance falls apart.